And it's time people woke up and realized, that we, first of all, financially, economically can take our power back overnight very easily. You just tear up their little pieces of paper and throw them away, and don't go down and sign on for all of that rubbish, right? And secondly, you can spiritually attune yourself. And this is, when I say spiritual, it doesn't mean what religion you are. Spiritually, you can attune yourself to say, I don't give the right to anyone, not any human being, nor anything, nor any goblin or ghost, to say that you control the reason for which I've been born on this planet and my prosperity. It's in my hands and my hands only, and I will decide. And if I act on my own free will and I fail, well, then I've taken responsibility for that. And if I succeed, I accept the glory of that. But no one else will decide my fate. That's what the world now needs to do, wake up, and that's what this series and talk is really about. And we break it down because it's a huge subject. We're just talking an overview. We break it down to all its subsets and show how the tyranny works so that we can then peel it away. Here's how it works in this area. Here's how it works here. Here's how it works here. Different in some cases, same in others. And so now you know what it is, and now you can get rid of it. Diagnosis followed by healing. That one little piece of information took, God knows how many months or years to not only understand, volumes and volumes to read, volumes of commentary to read, because you don't understand the original thesis written in by the man himself. So now you have to read commentaries on it, and commentaries on the commentary.
Beyond the forbidden.
I guess it just started, the first one was an homage. It wanted to bring out some of the work I've been researching since 1980s, actually. And also try to bring, a lot of my work is to try and bring to the world the teachers that have changed my life. And I can think of, so many, but there was certainly, you and I have talked earlier about Ralph Epperson.
Yeah.
The great Ralph Epperson, of course.
He was my
On this and Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the reasons I, wanted to come on your show, because his work is phenomenal. And again, it's so important that people research Ralph's work, The Unseen Hand and The World Order, these fantastic books. And so that was basically the idea, is to try and share with people the works of Jim Key and Alex Constantine, and Ezra Pound. And you can never do as much justice to these people as you want. But that was my attempt to do that, to lay the foundations, the groundwork, to show that in this, I really strongly believe that we're in a sort of an age of revealing or an age of awakening. And that can be very threatening for people.
Yeah.
And therefore, in order to just keep pointing fingers at some unseen sort of, homunculus behind the sort of curtain, like in a sort of a Wizard of Oz scenario, that also can breed a lot of fear and paranoia. It's very important to realize that there is this there is an architecture of control, and there are some hidden, agendas and so forth. But I also wanted to start addressing it from a slightly different perspective, which is this whole master-slave dichotomy. What is it in the slave that also needs the master? Or is it something that the slave has got used to? Or could it even be that in the inception of tyranny, the slave brought it into being in the first place? These are huge questions that very few people in the world have ever asked. And they do, in fact, take this into the realm of psychology, not as we might know it from a traditional, official sort of a textbook way, that they take us into philosophy, they take us into existential psychology in order to look at the dynamics of consciousness. Because so many people in this field have restricted their work to just pointing at the various, orgs or individuals that have been doing evil on mankind, perpetrating great evil for whatever reason. But my slant on has always been to find out what it is. And, the master-slave thing is basically a relationship. So what could it be that the human race has been doing? Let's look at that, because I also believe that that's where the solutions lie. Because if you can put your finger on what it is that we're doing that brings this about, and I mean even in our personal relationships as well as further up, the fractal, if we can put our finger on what that might be, there we might find the key to stopping it. Because if we cease to do what we're doing, then that might have some sort of impact. Just like in the same way that as a holistic doctor will tell you, look, the reason why you're sick is this. If you stop doing it, then you're going to be on the road to recovery and wellness. And so that was the basic idea behind Architects of Control. It was my first opportunity to start I did it in the 2012 talk in LA, and I have mentioned it in Origins of Evil and in other works in passing. But I really wanted to fundamentally get into doing it in a much stronger way to show what it is about consciousness itself that brings tyranny into the world.
Yeah. Um, to me, Michael, it seems like people want to be controlled and told what to do. Explain why it may be in our genetics which make humans more susceptible to be controlled.
Well, that's the key thing, because I had mentioned it in passing in the Atlantis what, and I had mentioned it in other areas that about this trauma. First of all, I mentioned people like Carl Jung, who always said that consciousness is actually quite a recent thing. Thinking itself is quite recent. It's not something that's been around too long, at least in the way we know it right now. And then my researches of the great myths, which is what the Atlantis book is really about, is Irish legends and various myths of the world. They're very, very clear on this, that the consciousness of human beings was in a really, really fragmented and shaken state not too long ago in history, and that there was traumas. And it wasn't just, the trauma was, from 4 or 5 different things. And when I read all these scholars and I was doing all this research for all these years, you'll find people who have a little piece of this, where they say, oh yeah, well, we know that the world was visited by, celestial cataclysm. Hey, it was comets, the Immanuel Velikovsky school, the Collins Beaumont school. They're always talking about celestial upheaval. And that's a key piece. Without understanding that, you can't make any headway. And then another group would, say, well, there actually may have been an alien visitation here. The ancient legends of the Maya, the Indians, Eastern Indians, and even in the Celtic legends, you hear about this. Sometimes in a veiled way, sometimes in a very clear way. And then other people will say, oh, well, no, it was just, other changes that took place, the sunspots, the geospheric magnetism of the Earth. Everybody the great Julian Jaynes wrote a book called The Great Breakdown of Bicameral Mind, The Origins of Consciousness. And he speaks about, that there was, again, some sort of undefinable trauma that took place in the psyche of man. He doesn't really get into detail about what it is, but he certainly says that through researching patients today, by looking at the nature of the brain today, it can be, in fact, dated that there was some sort of, massive trauma. And therefore, other teachers will pick up on that. Lev has written on this, that there was something odd going on. Various scholars have said this. But then what happened with me was I was able to bring all these theories under the umbrella of the philosophical question that I had, which is all through my work, Michael, which is about the origins of evil. How on earth did man become what he is? It's very serious to look into the past, and it's very serious to find out what went on. And so in the Atlantis book, we did talk about this, about consciousness being very, very much traumatized. And then after your question, I have now realized this is far connects, because what I'm talking about right now is about history and anthropology and things like that. And people would say, well, wait a minute. How does that then tie into, you work on conspiracy? And you're talking just a few minutes ago about secret societies and hidden brotherhoods and tyranny. Well, the point is that this is my journey of life, is brought me to this amazing discovery that this very trauma, this very fragmentation of the mind, this weakness, if you will, is exactly what was co-opted by the architects of control, probably as early as Sumerian times, if not before, and certainly as history moved up into the Elizabethan times and up into the modern age. The powers that be have always made use of this impotency. They've made use of the fact that man had a very short lifespan in just a few hundred years ago. They made use of the fact that man is a feudal slave. A serf, he couldn't even move from his village more than 5 or 10 miles without heavy penalization. And they've also made use of the fact that man's consciousness itself has been very, very weak in its foundations. And although this sounds very pessimistic and dire, within that, as I said, is also the secret, because there's a hidden optimism in all of this. It means that this architecture of control is quite recent. It means that mankind's thinking and consciousness is young. It means that we're only in the beginning stage of getting a handle on what on earth is going on this planet. And it means that there's an optimism to say that once we now find out, we're in the age of finding out these very things, then begin to change the world for the better. So those who are talking about ends of time and ultimate cataclysms and ultimate, endings of the world, they're not the school I belong to. I know that cycles come to the end. I know that there's major, challenges on the road ahead. But when you take it in the full scope of history, you realize something absolutely fascinating, is that we have never had the opportunity before in history to ever do anything really about the status quo. That's why these demagogues, these hideous, vampiristic, these planets have been able to prey over us like a bunch of vultures. Their time is actually ending to do this, as a matter of fact, because the human race is now finally getting the facts about the history, number one, about consciousness, number two, and number three, about what it is you're doing wrong, to start getting a handle on this state of decay so that you can do something very positive about it.
Yeah, many of the listeners might think like, I thought this show is going to be about New World Order and secret societies, but what they don't understand is that this is all connected. This just hasn't happened in the past couple hundred years. This has been in the making for a while, and I believe it's very critical that your previous works like the Atlantis book and also the astrotheology, it's all connected. And if people do, of course, as you say, this isn't necessarily music to the ears because not everyone wants to listen to this, but it's the truth, and people will need to try to do the, as you say, take the quotes and take all the research and all the information from the horse's mouth, and but I'm getting off subject, but for what purpose, Michael, were we created as a slave species? Like, why were we created as a slave species?
Well, that goes back to the Atlantis work again, which is that I actually do trust what many of the ancient legends have said. There's thousands upon thousands of texts that have the same refrain.
Yeah.
It talks about this alien visitation. But you're quite right. To go back to the point you just made, there certainly is. I've often said that my work is certainly not for everyone.
Yeah.
You have to already be up to speed on some of these aspects. You may even have come from the School of Psychology, but remember, I get feedback from all the people who've read the Atlantis book, and even from those who watched the DVD, and many of them are intellectuals and degreed people who absolutely adore what I've been doing because it's answered a lot of questions for them. In fact, I wouldn't even be here today if it hadn't been for the Lloyd Pyes and the Dr. Lears and the Richard Hoaglands and the Jordan Maxwells and so many others I could mention, who actively supported me because they have been in this work. And this includes Ken Thomas, the friend of Jim Keefe, and Jerry E. Smith and these people, because they had already had the 30, 40 years of research behind them. So when I came along with my little thing, about Celtic Ireland and the Druids, well, not Celtic Ireland, but Celtic world and then the Irish Druids, they were like a very complimentary and gave me a lot of feedback. And I get feedback from people who looked at it, all the way through. And it makes sense to them. The truth is, what it is not, like Nietzsche said, is man's irrefutable errors, the things that are just so false, but we won't change it. It's just where the world has been. Yeah. The truth is when you see the reality for what it is. And for me, that was always given in the legends of the ancient world. I know that sounds bizarre because legends tend to be very, veiled and poetic and mythological and so forth and so on. But in them, scientists have now been able to go into those legends. These are degreed people and get tremendous insight. Emmanuel Velikovsky did this when he was tracking his whole thing on the cometary disasters of the world, which is then later on sort of picked up a little bit by Zachariah Sitchin in his reading of what the Sumerian records were talking about. He believed that they were also talking about celestial cataclysm. So I kind of did the same thing. And I came up with this feeling that my focus again was more the origins of evil. It wasn't so much about some scientific palaver about, which comet collided with this comet or, which planet exploded. That was secondary. My most important question was what on earth is going on in the consciousness of man. So to answer your question, how did evil come about? How did the slavery that we see come about? How did the injustice we see come about? This is what I never found. I found that the religions of the world had absolutely preposterous answers for this. And science itself was lunatic. Any answers that it was offering were easily refutable. And even in philosophy, we had difficulties. And so I'm saying, my God, in all of these great institutions of learning, you mean to tell me that we don't have a really good definition of how man became the sadistic, sick creature that he's become? We need to look deeply into that. And my place to go, as I said, now is, with the myths and legends, which talk about an alien visitation. They talk about a kind of a very major trauma. And we're talking about Native American Indian legends and all across the world, from New Zealand, to Northern Russia, to Siberia, to the Scandinavia, to Ireland and England. And this became a great fascination for me. It became a great love. And people have to be up to speed on some of these aspects because, of course, in the early stages, the sort of what I described as the finger pointing thing, that takes up the majority of a people's interest, realizing that there are these, remember, there's the architecture of control and there's the architects. The architects are sort of recycled. And, you have always a Blair and a Bush and a Clinton and a Thatcher and a Hitler. These people are recyclable. You always have a new talent on the block. You always have a new people's champion. But the architecture of control itself is many thousands of years old. So you need to have both a historical perspective on certain things, but you need to also be very rooted in the now and as to what is going on in the consciousness of human beings. And to answer your question, basically, it's partly conditioning that creates the slave, but it's also partly this ancestral trauma is huge. And my work is still going into it. Even now, in fact, I'm doing a series of talks here in Europe called Age of Manipulation. If people come to my website, they can check it out. It's posting it on the forum, the updates and the pictures and stuff like that. I'm still going into this, question, and because the problem doesn't go away. People say, why you do the work that you do is because, look,
It's still
I
here.
make it, exactly. But if anything, it's getting worse,
Uh-huh. So as in your research, and I believe it, I believe that what you're saying is very true. Like, so evil and schizophrenia and all the other medical conditions that people have or mental conditions, it's all from past traumatized events.
And not all. Just like even in traditional psychiatry and traditional psychology, environment is now known to play an enormous factor. So it's both. It's a combination of all sorts of things. But what my work, as I do focus, when I focus in close to the canvas, then I know about this ancestral thing. For instance, I put on recently on the forum pictures of weird growths. Like there's this woman with all the horns going out of her head.
Yeah.
And we know about Siamese twins. We know about what is very degradingly called freaks. We know that there's children who are born with hair on their bodies. We know all about the sort of extra nipple syndrome, and all of these kind of weird hybrid creatures that are born, and all these kinds of strange genetic mutations that take place. So, and then when you ask a scientist or a biologist about that, they'll go, oh, well, that has to do with the heredity, or that has to do with something, a throwback situation. And therefore, it's accepted biologically. And yet, it's difficult for people to realize that, a lot of their psychological traits, particularly the most important one being, the penchant to be a slave, to have no sense of self. But even a lot of others, there's a whole nightmare list of things that happen to us and of the way that we are thinking is oriented that also have a historical perspective. Now, one of the problems with the modern world is that there's almost like what Gore Vidal calls, amnesia, historical amnesia. And other people have even called it cosmic amnesia, where, we've been disconnected from our spirit. We've been disconnected from our ancestors. We've been disconnected from the past. And so we think of ourselves as very isolated, modern individuals, and history plays almost no part at all in our perspective on ourselves.
It's kind of leading up to my next question about fear. I believe that fear is placed purposely in the news and in the world by the elite, so that it puts people in, I guess you can say, to a constant state of submission. Therefore, it makes it easier for them to fulfill their agendas. Like, elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, you couldn't be more right. And this is one of the subtopics of this latest talk that I'm doing as well. There's fear and anxiety. There's a constant drip feed of that through the media. As we said, there's the ancestral trauma, but then there's the constant downloading of the same ingredients which keep a man in a state of submission. And this ties back to what you were saying about going to the quotes and going to the sources.
Yeah.
Because this information is absolutely patently in their works. When you go to the Fabian Society and these minions of the Fabian organization and their communitarian network, and when you read these ideologists and philosophers like I do, because again, it's important to notice these shadowy characters behind the obvious people's champions and read their works. In an American context, that would be the Colonel Mandel Houses. You see the Edward Bernays, the kind of the Brzezinskis, of course. So many shadowy figures, Errol Quigley. There's a lot of people out there, Aldous Huxley from an English point of view, George Orwell, and many, many others that I mentioned in my work. They're telling you in no uncertain terms about how this dynamic works. And that without a constant drip feeding of fear and anxiety and trepidation, without wars and rumors of wars, without constantly pulling the rug from under people and always threatening them with meltdowns of various kinds, you not only keep the human creature in a state of total panic and inner trauma and anxiety, but you also make sure of something even more important. And this is what we went into in Architects of Control very deeply. And that is that you keep that person living on the surface of themselves. Because remember, we're talking about the selfless man. We're talking about the man who's completely, lost in the machinery of the world and lost in that architecture. And the way out from that is to return to who am I? The very first words that we said in the Architects of Control were those famous philosophical questions, why am I here? Who am I? Where am I going? It's very important for the controllers that people don't ask those questions. And if they ever should have those kinds of emotional, spiritual questions and quest, they've already created the religions of the world that they've put in front of you so that you'll run to them hoping to get those answers. So they've already taken care of the fact that just in case, there's a certain, you can't suppress that inner voice. So we'll create a big leviathan of even yet more tyrants, wolves in sheep's clothing, to give you these pseudo answers, these bogus answers, and hopefully that will pacify you. And even if they don't have that, then there's been this outer shell of New Ageism and other forms of spiritualism, you see, maybe sprinkled with some truth, just in fact, like religion also has a lot of truth in it. And this helps then for people to become waylaid. Ultimately, the real ploy is to stop a person going back to the real shrine of truth, which is their own selfhood. And so if they can get lost, spend a whole lifetime, you see, in religion and in other forms of cults, what will happen is they don't realize that they're just taking a scenic route back to the prison. It's like some hideous marathon man situation in which you think you're getting away, you're driving away, and actually the car turns around the corner and you're back into the chamber of horrors. It's just these scenic routes back into imprisonment and enslavement. But remember, the most important thing to remember, which is we talk about in the end of the DVD, Architects of Control, is that these people are absolutely delighted when you yourself walk up to the prison and go, let me in, I'm lonely, I'm lost, bang, 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 can you please give me my cell back? They're not, so much interested in going and riding you down and hunting you down. That they'll do when they feel like some sport. But they are far more adoring when a whole line of slaves, with bowl in hand, come up looking for their degrees, looking for their, home, looking for their security, because this man has completely abnegated his duty to himself. And most important thing is, again, keep man so infatuated with the worldly stuff that he refuses to find out the miracle of his own existence, the miracle of his own life, the miracle of the reasons why he's here.
Hey, Michael, I have a question from the chat room. It says, let me see here. David Icke's moon matrix theory is coming out. Does some of this conspiracy theorizing hinder the truth movement and sidetrack us from the working on the self?
Well, no, because you have to get your arms around all the information. First of all, I don't really believe in a truth movement per se. I think that's sort of a myth. I don't know what that is. I know there's a lot of bandwagon hoppers. I know there's a lot of plagiarists, and I know there's a lot of people out there with a very small grasp on any of these facts, trying to pose as if they know something because they realize that this movement is now picking up steam, and so many interested parties are coming along. So just like the New Age movement got gate crashed with every kind of fake and loser and louse and pawn slime, so has the conspiracy movement now get basically gate crashed with a lot of people who really don't belong there, or who also have very, very shady agendas, or even more benignly, a very thin grasp on the facts of what we're really doing. So I haven't even been up to speed on what David's been doing recently.
Yeah, me either.
So I couldn't really comment, but I do support his work.
I
love his work. So but to answer your question, it's about everyone. There's nothing in this movement when it comes to the knowledge that's threatening. You have to go yourself into it and find out what works for you. I get this email, you see, like 200 times a month about, who should I listen to and where should I start, and what do you think of this guy and that guy? And I always say the same thing, is like, I don't ever comment, ever, on the work of other scholars or other people, unless it's actually involved in my own professional work, that I maybe make an anecdote here and there. But generally, when it's in dialogue with other people or in correspondence, I do not have anything to say about any of these other scholars or other teachers. It's up to the individual to go and research my work and their work, and to do the homework. There are no shortcuts, to get their arms around all the information, and then decide for themselves what it is that makes sense to them. Some stuff they'll throw out and just go, look, I'm not ready for this, or this doesn't sound right, or hey, there's a factual error here, or there's a factual error there. Well, that happens even in the greatest scientific textbooks. Errors are good. Mistakes are all right. That's what helps us move on. And since this work is so much collaborative anyway,
Yeah.
at a certain level, we're always updating and changing what we know and moving along. It's a process. As I keep saying, this work cannot be territorialized. There are no experts in it. It's, as I said, it's early stages. So all of us are going, all of us are learning, all of us are revising, all of us are discovering new things. It's about the spirit of adventure. It's about the spirit of realizing that the journey you're going on is as interesting, if not more interesting, than the goal that you're supposed to be reaching. And for somebody to try and sit on some high chair, you see, without a single book or DVD to their name, and then be pointing fingers and telling you that, you're wrong here and you're wrong there, is absolutely the height of egomania, vanity, and absolute disrespect is what it is, because it's disrespect on the energy and the effort that people like myself put into the work. And we're not going to stop because of all of this criticism, see. So yeah, there may be some areas that people don't relate to, or it threatens their personal belief systems, but we're not into belief systems. We're into truth. We're not into belief, or we're not into faith. We're into facts, and then we're into truth. And again, my work is almost 90% going to the horse's mouth. So it's not that me that's wrong. It's like, if you don't like something, well, then go to the sources of the people that I learned this from myself and take it up with them.
Yeah. What I find, because as we talked about yesterday, when we were chatting, that you read a lot, as I do too. You read a lot, and what I find fascinating is that, since you're a writer, how long does it take to write a book? At least a couple years, right?
It depends on the book. In my experience, it can be the writing of the book is kind of quick, but the other technical aspects of editing and layout and revision, revising, updating, this can, of course, take then a span of many years, depending on what the book is. For instance, because of the internet, one good thing is that I don't put my appendices sections in the books anymore. I put them online. The Atlantis book had the appendices, but then what I noticed is that the appendices keep swelling. A lot of stuff that you have to leave out of the book for space. Remember, when a person's writing a book, you also have to take in the technical considerations, like how thick is the book going to be, and how big is it going to be, and how much is it going to cost to mail the thing, and all of these things. So you can't just be adding constantly to the actual book in hard copy. And therefore, because it's utterly, you just can't do it. It's not logistically possible. So with the internet, the beautiful thing is all my websites feature appendices pages, so that anything that people send me, or remember, when I write a book, I just don't finish researching that subject. The book is one thing. I've continued through the years, continuing to add more to that thesis. So what I do is I put the appendices online. So if people go to the Irish Origins or the Atlantis site, or say they go to the astrotheology site, they'll find these appendices there, and they're constantly being updated every single day, with new information constantly evolving and so on. And that is, of course, takes a lot of time. If you had to add those pages to a physical book, the thing, you couldn't even get it through the door.
Yeah.
The Irish Origins book would just be impossible to mail to anyone. It would be like 2,000 pages long. It's already a box set. My company couldn't find a box to put it in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what I was talking about is that, it takes a lot of hard work and effort and a lot of research to write a book, and we get to read it within a couple of days or a couple of weeks,
Yeah.
and we get to absorb all that knowledge that researcher or that author took, all that time and effort to write down and to research. It's just beautiful, because we have to fall in love with knowledge, just like you say, and we get to absorb it within a few days. And I just find that very beautiful,
And that was the plan with my books, especially, is to try and, especially the Irish Origins book, that research started back in a humble way in 1982 and picked up very strongly in about 85. And so my idea was to try and compress all the knowledge that I'd read. I mean, literally 32 crates of books, Michael, 32 crates of books. I know, because I have to haul these things physically, me and my friends and my brother, to so many apartments in America, it's not even funny. So I know exactly how many there are and what they contain. Since got rid of a lot of stuff, of course, but in those days, it was just reading constantly, reading and reading and reading, and continuing to do that today. But the idea was to try and compress all of that into my work so that people don't have to spend that 30 years or whatever, in going into these areas. And so it does take a long time. I mean, writing the Irish Origins book was a 2-year process from the time I got the idea to do it. And that was an accident until the time it first came out in November of 2007. 2 solid years of almost like 14-hour days, and my body was in a state of total disrepair afterwards. I mean, completely stiff, just sitting for hours and hours and hours and refusing to do anything else, and constant research. And just the toll it takes on your arms and your shoulders and body, alone is devastating, So it does take an awful lot of work and effort. Yeah.
Back to some of the questions that I have down here. I don't believe that the Rothschilds, Rockefellers, Freemasons, and other secret societies are the capstone of the control pyramid structure. Who or what is the capstone that is the driving force behind these groups?
Well, that's a very fascinating question, and that is, of course, takes to the heart of the Irish Origins book and Atlantis book. And I'd say that to take it in stages, you're quite right. Any of these individuals that you happen to see, especially in the public eye, since the advent of television and radio, tend to be, not all the time, but tend to be quite low down, as a matter of fact. In fact, very low down in the vast majority of cases. A little bit further up, if you go back before the TV age, and you go back into the history books and you start seeing these Leopolds of Austria and, the Charles de Lorraines, various Habsburgs, various kings and potentates of the past, perhaps even some popes, you're going a little higher up the ladder because, of course, before the television cameras existed, these people, who were a little bit more well-known, and you can their faces do appear in the history books. They weren't as camera shy because there simply wasn't any cameras. So, certain potentates, Constantine, if you want to take it back through the Christian era, the Theodosiuses, there's been all sorts of characters who have been very, very high up the ladder as you go further back. And as you start tracking this particular ideological and physical bloodline backwards, and of course, many scholars do this and come up with different ideas, of course. In my research, I came across the figure, basically, of Akhenaten, the very, infamous pharaoh of Egypt back about 1400 years BC.
Yeah.
And although he himself wasn't the supreme highest, he was about as far up the pyramid as you're going to get when it comes to photogenics, when it comes to the fact that here we have a definable character whose face and visage is in the history books, his sculptures have been made, and then later on in life, and perhaps even before him, that's the same kind of concept. You're talking about pharaohs, you're talking about a certain group of powerful people who belong to what William Bramley referred to as the Brotherhood of the Snake. It's also referred to as the Dragon Court. You're talking about this dynasty of people who I very much believe have the alien blood that I spoke about in the Atlantis book. And it's their descendants, both in a physical, biological state, and also in a ideological context, that then rule the world. And therefore, highest up the pyramid then from there on would be various peoples in the Habsburgs, the Hanoverians, many of the people known as the Black Venetians, even though they tend to be a little bit lower down. But certainly the Queen Victorias, the present Queen of England. There is a dispute going on about whether or not her side of the family is actually legitimate. They may have come in from the left wing. They were royal, but they may have usurped the actual throne of Britain. These kinds of points are important, but they're not ultimately important because, remember, we're talking about a network of royals. So even if one family sort of got usurped or died out and another one who's less legitimate got in there, it's really unimportant because we're still talking Plantagenets, we're still talking Tudors. And as I said before, the time of the advent of modern media, when you are talking about these Edward Longshanks and you're talking about these various, like William the First, the famous Lionheart, and these types of people that we would, why are we calling them kings and queens? Where did they come from? We take it so obviously, like, oh, they're aristocracy, they're royalty. Yes, but where did that concept come from? Who are these people? What gave them the right? Why do they talk about, the divine right of kings? who was James II? Who was Edward the First? Who was the Duke of Champagne? Who was these Knights Templar Merovingian people? Because remember, all the Knights Templars of France. This is Hugh de Payens and the Duke de Champagne, and all of these top people were members of a very powerful royal dynasty known as the Merovingian dynasty, that itself goes back to the Sicambrian Franks, who are German, and then to the German, they go back to the Teutons, and to the Teutons, you can track them all the way back to Egypt. So there's this Egyptian line, there's this what's called Judaic line, which is not the same thing as anything to do with modern religious Judaism, by the way, but it's known as the Judaic line, coming from a different rendering of that word, you see.
Yeah.
David Livingstone is another scholar who's picked up this whole movement to the Islamic Brotherhood through the north, moving to Armenia. And basically the term that I've used for this Cabal, the highest of the Cabal, is Atonist. And that has to do with one of the gods that they worshipped, or one of the primary gods that they worshipped, was called Aton. And that, in fact, is Aton in another rendering, is the same as the Hebrew Jewish term Adonai, which is a stand-in for the word Jehovah. So they're actually Yahwists. These are another school of people who come and go, yeah, we know about them. They're the Yahwists. And they would be right in a way, because Yahweh was a composite god, very ancient composite god, that is basically a sort of a disguised version of Aton, the god of Akhenaton and the god of this dragon court. So again, all these pieces tie in. And I didn't have an agenda when I was researching all of this, you see, and I'm not there to bash anybody's religious beliefs, as long as those beliefs are individual to them. But I certainly am there to implicate these institutions of tyranny and these institutions of mass genocide and death. Yeah, I'm surely going to want to expose those, and that's what I've been doing in my life, to find out what are their belief systems, why have they got an outer court for the average person, and why have they got an inner court reserved for, teachings reserved for initiates. What's that all about? So I've been trying to peer over the wall, and sort of look through the keyhole and try to do as much research to be up to speed on some of these more shadowy occult doctrines, which are very important to know about, because those are for the inner sanctum, and those are the initiates that then run the world. And then through those core groups, you have the von Taxis family, and you have all of these other groups you see that move out and start controlling the media, the rock and roll groups, the various religions, the spiritualist groups of the world, even the legal and medical professions, although my focus is more on the media, how they control the media. In fact, we're doing a whole thing on that in this latest talk, Age of Manipulation. And in the Origins and Oracle theories, I dealt with that. I've been studying that for about 20, 30 years as well, this whole concept of how through the media they're able to purvey, because there's a strange quirk. Don't ask me why they do it, but there's some strange quirk that you can define these groups and their agendas by the symbolism that they use. And bizarrely, they tend to use this symbolism right in plain view. And so by a symbolic literacy, by decoding these sacred symbols and these not so sacred symbols that they use, you can actually identify the face behind the curtain, because they use these symbols ubiquitously throughout our world. And these symbols actually there's a language in them, they mean something.
It doesn't matter if those symbols and all this occult stuff that they do is actually true. The thing is that they believe it is,
Exactly.
I try to stay interactive with my chat room, and then I try to stay interactive with my chat room, and then this is a really good question that one just asked. Is the game to be waking people up, or to let this flow of evolution take its shape naturally while increasing one's own vibration and knowledge?
It's a bit of both. However, I will add that in my particular view, nobody has the power to wake anybody else up. The awakening actually comes from within. Again, it can be a little bit of a shadow play. There can be a little, parallax view involved in this, in which we imagine that the awakening process is taking place from something that happens outside. This is basically an illusion created by the ego. Actually, the awakening process is primarily something that is already happening within, but because we are so afraid of our inner being, and we're also afraid of, what's very perniciously called the dark side of our personality, we are not even able to feel anymore where these inner changes take place, because we run the medication, we run to the media, we run to our stupid friends. Everybody's out there in the world interacting externally and we're very much divorced from our own inner natural senses and our own inner natural, impulses. But having said that, that doesn't mean that these psychological unconscious states stop. And so when I talk about age of revealing and age of awakening, I'm actually really referring, because all the shaman knew this, all the shaman understood very deeply that this is about inner changes. And those could be tracked through astrology. This is the basis of the Maya, and all prophecy was based on, certain external things, like astrology, being used to track these seasonal changes in the psyche of human beings, but never forgetting for a moment that all true awakening takes place within. Then what's really happening is something motivates you then, from the outside, to begin consciously seeking. And it's at this point that the conscious mind goes, I picked up this interesting book, or hey, I just heard this interesting radio podcast, or hey, I just met this interesting person, who start talking to me about a lot of this, and then explains it. Or even more deeply, things in your own private life. I mean, things in your job, things in your relationship, things in paying your taxes, coming up against the institutions of corruption might spark what I call the blue flame of anger, might spark the spirit of rebellion. And then externally go, well, I'm going to find out about this. How many books do we know? Even bestsellers, books by ex-mafia people, books by, conspiratorial writers, who have just got so mad. People who've written on the so-called justice system. It's really the injustice system. How many books and exposures have been done, even including military generals, because people got sick to death of having to deal with the external form of tyranny. This is the true for Scott Ritter, for instance, who was the weapons inspector to Iraq, who, basically came back and realized this thing is just a tissue of complete deception and lies. And during 9/11, people can cast their mind back. Look how many books and writings were done from even insiders like John Dean and many others because of their frustration. So never again, and it ties into these darker emotions I was talking about and how they're so deeply misunderstood. They are actually some of the finest things that we have. These are virtues. These are incredible guides on the road to true truth. They spark you. Yeah, they spark an individual who may be just, completely just a couch potato, already just be surfing all day long. Not that there's anything wrong with surfing in itself. But the thing is, this spirit of rebellion and this anger factor that goes, I'm not going to take this anymore. What the hell do these people think they're doing? I know nurses who got fired for the slightest thing, and that sparked their entire interest in finding out who is behind this medical leviathan. Who are these people who dare do this to me? I'm a good person. I've worked hard all my life. I know people in NASA that this happened to. I know Freemasons that this happened to. You see, right across the board, most of the people I've physically met actually got into this subject because they got angry. They got really, dejected about what was taking place to them and how their own effort and lives were being ruined by these establishments. That sparked their interest to find out, go deeper and deeper, to find out what is really going on.
Well, I must say that everyone is fascinated by this, by your work, Michael, because our chat room is just blazing right now. So, and and back to what you were saying a while ago. One listener said that the problem is we're not using both sides of our brain, and you go into that very well. Explain that a little bit.
Well, he's absolutely right. This is another part of the trauma. When we talk about left and right sides of the brain, even when we talk about conscious and unconscious, we have to stop there for a moment and revise, and we have to examine what we've just said. Are we implying that there's a split in the brain? I mean, the biologists accept it, and the psychologists accept it, and speak about it almost as if it's just, matter of course. Hang on. Why is there not one consciousness? And then you even get into Freud, and he's got 3 parts of the anatomy of the psyche. Fascinating discovery. Then you go into Jung, and he divides it into 4. And you go into various other scholars, and even go over the East, they have their own paradigm, and you're finding, hold on a minute, are we talking about one consciousness here? Are we talking about something that's deeply fragmented, and you basically have a schizoid nature within? You have a war going on inside your own psyche, and that's not even to mention what Wilhelm Reich brings up, where he says, oh, but your mind is even at war with your body. Your biology, your bioethics is a kind of brain. Aren't your nerves a brain? Isn't your stomach a brain? Don't the organs have intelligence? In many cultures of the world, the heart was the center of intelligence, not the brain. And recently, a couple of years back, they found out that the heart is actually made from neural cells, meaning that it is a brain. They've actually discovered this, that there's neural cells in the heart. So we're talking about all forms, and I've addressed this so many times in my work, that man is literally, not only is he the temple of the living God, but he's a temple in ruins. His vocabulary of psyche and his vocabulary of body, everything is in a state of ruins. And so in that state, how on earth can such a man, who, as your listener said, who's in that state of dichotomy, who may not even be using both sides of his brain and maybe only using a small part of even the part that he's using, how can that creature possibly create social harmony, social justice, and utopia? It is absolutely impossible. And up until very recent times, people believed that you could do this. They believe, oh, you have to create a political party. I mean, what's so difficult about this? Wait a minute. You just get lots and lots of people together. Go out and give some flyers, wave a few placards, do a few commercials. We need a group of people. Let's get a big mass group together. Well, they tried that in communist Russia. They tried it in Adolf Hitler's times. Right? What? Was the crowd not big enough at Nuremberg? We have tried that. We have tried every other thing. And that's why I said it takes time. Man is in a journey. He needs to make all the mistakes, because otherwise he'll be seduced by thinking that psychology is not important. It's only in now that we realize that we have to come back to the door. It's like Alice in Wonderland. The more Alice runs away from the house, the more she turns up back at the doorstep again. That is a very, very important metaphor. Is because we are being brought back to consciousness because we left consciousness at the door, and we tried all these other remedies, all these other political, religious, psychosocial, attempts to remedy things, and at the very most, you'll have a certain topical, remedy.
Yeah.
But then you go to the scholars, then you go to the experts, the people doing the polls and the people studying the mind, and I'm talking about huge organizations that spend billions on doing this kind of research, and they now find that Western man, British man, American man is unhappier today. The statistics of depression are unbelievable. I have them somewhere, but I haven't got time to go find them. But just generally speaking, man is a much more unhappier creature, even since the 1920s, his affluence has skyrocketed with all the gadgets that he has, all the leisure time that he has, all the relative affluence that he has. He's actually a much more depressed and unhappy creature. And depression claims the lives of so many teens. Like, I think it's like second to car accidents or something like that. But don't quote me on that, but it's very high. And we only need to look at the medication rates to realize, and the illegal drug addiction and all of these things to realize that this is absolutely true. And so this has been the result of doing exactly what I said. There's a price to pay for going down the wrong road. It is an adventure. You have to do it. You can't stop mankind from doing this. Mankind needs to exercise its pent-up aggressions in war. If you're not going to look at your own self psychologically and spiritually, expect war. It was said by Lao Tzu thousands of years ago, and I'll repeat it today. If you don't take the true legitimate road, then expect some pernicious outletting or venting of that particular energy. This is the fact. Carl Jung said, and Freud and the great psychologist said, if you don't deal with your own masculine and feminine within, then expect rotten relationships. Expect loss, expect divorce, expect treachery, deception, hostility, guilt, shame, and the whole cocktail that comes with it. That has an origin. It's because you're not doing the true work within yourself. There you have this negative consequence. So for every pernicious thing that you see in this world, and I don't care what it is, teen addiction, pornography, whatever it might be, the ecology disasters of the world, the fauna death all over the place, and in fact, even the climate changes, all the things that you might point to that say this is negative. That is a result of the capitulation of something else that has not been done, been neglected. It's a simple logic. This is a really no-brainer when you start thinking about it. And therefore, it's the same thing with the whole movement of history. Man has had to go down all these wrong roads, try all these other fixes and remedies. It's like trying to call a TV mechanic. To do surgery on your child when you have to do surgery on the liver. I mean, it's ridiculous. This is what we've been doing. You don't call a tree surgeon when you need your TV fixed. We've been doing this.
Let me see here. What is it about those who think they need medications and prescriptions for everything under the moon to help solve their problems? Is it because they need the mind-altering drugs to block out the problems of the world? To me, that's exactly what the elite want. Explain.
Well, yes, you're right. And remember, in some certain instances, the medication is very necessary. If you're schizoid, You will literally think of those medications as an elixir.
Yeah.
But that's in the extreme cases where, to offset some very, very negative stuff that's happening in your mind, will drive you to absolute suicide and despair. Perhaps, because I'm not bashing the science that has created these medications. They're necessary just in the same way a therapy is necessary, or a hospital is necessary if you broke a leg. You may hate hospitals, but man, you won't be thinking that if you have a car wreck, or your child has broken its arm or something like that.
Yeah.
And so a schizoid person clings to his medicine like, I need this, man. This is my elixir. Thank God for this. Yeah, because what's happening in that poor person's mind, our streets are filled with these poor people. Ever really found out what it means to be schizoid? Ever found out what it means to be in rags and walk in the street? That you'd rather live on alcohol and just be that kind of way? Have you ever been in that person, like say, walk in that person's shoes to find out why a person may have made those choices? What might be going on in that person's mind that's so frightening and so deadly and so full of despair that, even going to what we know, another affluent group like us, say, there's bloody doctors and their medication. A poor person like that who's seen the abyss, who's walked on the edge of insanity, can we walk in that person's shoes before we say what this person's reality is and the losses they may have felt and the way they may have seen reality? Because a lot of these people, a lot of these so-called, derelicts and people who have to live in this way have actually been to the edge. They've seen the world for what it is, but they couldn't handle it. So therefore, the part answer to the question is that they require some sort of medication because their spirit wasn't up to it. They couldn't handle looking at the reality or the state of decay, or in many cases, what the angels had to show them. When that veil is pulled back, not on the ideas of reality, but on reality itself. And many people listening to my voice may have even had people in their family that this has happened to. So if that veil is for any reason, whether it's a demon pulling it back or it's an angel pulling it back, and you see what is really out there, the state of decay that man has made of the world and made of consciousness and made of himself, that is not particularly pretty. It's one of the reasons why I like rock music and heavy metal, because these guys point this out. It's brutal, but they're going to say, hey, we'll put your face in it. We'll show you what a mess man has made of the world and what a state of decay exactly exists. We'll bring it right up to your face. And I think it's a very healthy thing to do. But there's certain people, you see, whose psyche couldn't take it when they were young. And therefore, the medication and some of these establishments, they're dependent on it. But to get back to the main point of your question, is of course it's escape. And don't forget that it's also a way to keep out all the stimuli that's coming in. That sort of connect a little bit to what I've just been saying. But in a more milder way, our brain and our senses are absolutely besieged morning, noon, and night with stuff. A lot of it extremely toxic and poisonous. The stuff that I point out in these advertisements, the subliminal content, the pornographic content, the very, very satanic content. I mean, really evil, not what people think, going around wearing a pentagram t-shirt, or listening to Black Sabbath. No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about absolute, deep, ancient evil is alive and well, and it's coming into our home, the ancient sorcery. And therefore, people's brains are getting toxic. And therefore, there's only a certain point. There's only a certain point you can cross before that person cannot take it anymore. And then don't forget, add to that all their domestic and professional trauma, trying to come up to speed to get a degree, trying to have a family, trying to go to work every day and hang out with those bozos, dealing with the neighbors, shopping, earning a living, dealing with intimate relationships, walking the dog. Do you realize our world is just filled with stuff to do? And most of it is illegitimate. It doesn't even have anything pertaining to our own spiritual development. So how then, in that kind of illegitimate world, where we're just functionaries, either playing a role or have been deluded into some other nonsense pertaining to relationships or domestic minutiae. And then not only this other higher level of toxicity that's pouring in, of course, there's going to be a terrible consequence, a reaction. And then in comes the Leviathan. Here's now we come to the crux of your question. Knowing that, because as I said in the earlier part of our conversation, these guys have their fingers on the pulse. They've not only created the problem, they create the so-called solution. Knowing that they still need workers to, run the hive, knowing that they still need the operative, knowing that they still need this remote-controlled robot, this slave, they can't completely have you go insane and become pathological. That's no good. So they come in with their medications. And so the entire same pan-Masonic Leviathan that runs the medical profession and all their so-called bromides is exactly the same cabal as creates the toxicity with the other hand. This is the most incredible thing. As I said, many people see this and they can't even handle it. They go insane just from seeing this. But nevertheless, this is how this great theater play works. And so you don't completely drop through the net. They can't afford that, you see, because they still need somebody to run the machines, so to speak.
Yeah.
And therefore, they keep the person then in a sort of a delirium, a drugged out, semi-human, pseudo-intellectual, pseudo-emotional, right? We're not even in our true emotions anymore, like I've been saying. We're not in our true senses anymore. We don't spend time in nature. We don't even spend time with our own children or with animals as much as we should. Everything is a slave. We're either a slave to it or they're a slave to us, hence the usual dynamic that you have in the family.
Hey, Michael, we got about a little less than 2 minutes left, but our chat room is blazing, man. Like, we're still getting more listeners in, and I gotta ask this question because this is very critical. Hollywood and mainstream documentaries seem to be implementing Armageddon into the collective consciousness. Could a man-made event be being planned that is made to look natural?
Oh, yeah. It has been done in the past. It's actually been done continually. And remember, as the Age of Awakening continues, as the slave starts waking up, these architects of control are right there with their syringes ready to do something again to put us back into our to put us back into the penitentiary or to that decorated incarceration. So you can never rule that out. Absolutely not.